Good morning and welcome to the 24th Annual Colleges of the Fenway MLK Celebration, co-sponsored by the Colleges of the Fenway and Massachusetts College of Art and Design. My name is Justine Karen, and I'm the Executive Director of Mass Art. We're delighted you're joining us today for an inspirational conversation with King Boston's Executive Director, Amari Paris Jeffries, and Massachusetts College of Art and Design President, Dr. Mary Kay Grant. As a reminder, we're recording today's program. We'll be making it available on the College of the Fenway's website. The College of the Fenway, Mass Art, and King Boston recognize that those gathering both in person and virtually must acknowledge the land upon which our institutions occupy. Our institutions are located on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Wampanoag, the Massachusetts, the Nipmuc, and the Abenaki tribes. From Manchester to Boston to Worcester, our campuses strive to nurture community, collaboration, and respect for our students, staff, faculty, and alumni. As an extension of this spirit, we're committed to knowing better and doing better for those who've honored this land first, and also the communities from the African diaspora who have been enslaved on this land. We acknowledge this part of our history to affirm our values to pursue a more just, compassionate, and equitable learning environment. We also invite you to consider the inequities embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways we think using every day. We're using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many communities of color. So we invite you to acknowledge all this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, economic justice, cultural representations, and allyship. We begin this morning. Please help me in welcoming and thanking this morning's music provided by the Colleges of the Fenway's Jazz Band, playing Come Rain or Come Shine, led by director Jason Whiting on piano, Simmons professor Ray Pfeiffer on bass, and Emmanuel class of 23 student Lauren Garcia on vocals. We're pleased to welcome you to our virtual campus today, and we look forward to highlighting Dr. Martin Luther King's timeless legacy. I would like to thank Kristen Young, Director of COF's Center of Performing Arts, for all of her efforts in organizing this event. In addition, we'd like to thank John Ashworth King and Tony Flackett from Mass Arts Technology Services for technical support for today's program. I'd also like to recognize the COF Celebration Committee members who have volunteered their time and energy to plan this annual event. You can see their names on the slide. When you see them on campus, please join me in thanking them. On a personal note, one of my favorite inspirational quotes from Dr. King is as follows: "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl, but by all means, keep moving." As a white female ally, I acknowledge there's a lot more work to further Dr. King's lesson of legacy and equality, justice, and peace. As we all come together today, I hope you enjoy this next hour as we honor and celebrate Dr. King and his legacy. Now at this time, it's my deep pleasure to introduce Dr. Mary Kay Grant, President of Mass College of Art and Design. Dr. Grant became President of Mass College of Art and Design in July 2021, bringing nearly 30 years experience as President of Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, Chancellor of the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and President of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for United States Senate. Prior to her appointment at Mass Art, President Grant was Senior Administrative Fellow for Civics and Social Justice at Bridgewater State University, where she led the Martin Richard Institute for Social Justice and co-chaired of the President's Special Task Force on Racial Justice. With a longtime personal commitment to civic engagement and social justice, President Grant served on the board of National Campus Compact and the Program Committee of Youth Service Organization Project 351, an annual one-day celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s statewide university and youth leadership. Without further ado, I turn it over to you, President Grant.
Great. Thank you, Justine. Thanks for your very warm welcoming. And thank you. Let me please add my thanks to Justine's regarding the committee. I want to just thank all of you for the work that you've done and helping to make today's program possible. And I would like to just give a shout out to the jazz band. A beautiful opening and a very warm and rich way to begin today's program. And so I'm just delighted to be here with you today to offer a few opening comments before we introduce our speaker and we engage in conversation. The colleges of the Fenway have been gathering for 24 years to take this time to honor the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and to reaffirm how we in higher education engage, lead, challenge, and provoke, how we prepare our students for a world that is rapidly changing and will continue to challenge them. Dr. King believed in the power of young people to lead and transform our communities, and those of us who have the privilege, I would say those of us who have the joy to work with our students, we believe that as well. We see it every day and we see them. Throughout these challenging times, I have marveled at the creativity, the resiliency, the imagination, the problem solving, the sense of justice, and the hopefulness that we see from our students. And I've been deeply inspired by the work of our faculty and staff who have found new ways to engage students, build community, and carry on and carry out the mission of our institutions. Dr. King noted that everyone can be great because everyone can serve. Well, you all help to make us great through the way you lead, teach, engage, and serve. I know that I speak for all of my College of the Fenway president, friends, and colleagues when I say thank you to the faculty, staff, and students for all that you do and all that you have done, not during just these challenging times, but in the 24 years that have led up to today's wonderful gathering. Next year, 2023, MassArt will be celebrating our 150th anniversary. We were chartered by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Great and General Court, who believed that we needed a school that would focus on equipping the next generation of artists, makers, designers, educators, innovators, and leaders. While the tools may have evolved and some have stayed the same, we continue to do that today as the only public freestanding art college in the country. Think about that, the only one. That's a wonderful mission that we indeed have. And at the heart of that mission has always been the pursuit of a just, compassionate, and equitable learning environment. Those values center our work today. They are cornerstones for our creative community. Beyond the extraordinary education and creativity that takes place within the classroom, within the galleries, within our studios, and now in the online space at MassArt, you may see us in the community in many different ways. Perhaps it's through our Artwood Bound program or Saturday studios. Or maybe you've had the chance to engage with the programs of the Center for Arts and Community Partnerships. It's really hard to miss the beautiful, bright, colorful Spark the Artmobile. And I invite all of you to come and visit us at our museum, the MassArt Museum, which is by design free and open to the public so that we are accessible to anyone who wants to be able to be part of this community. At MassArt, we have always believed in the power of community and our collective power to transform the world for good. So today, as we come together to honor Dr. King, to draw inspiration, to renew our energy for the ongoing work, and to take it on as our collective responsibility to keep working for justice, for equity, for inclusion. But we don't do this work alone. We do this work with partners, such as King Boston. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce you to the executive director of King Boston, my friend, Amari Parrish Jeffries. In June of 2020, Amari Parrish Jeffries was named the executive director of King Boston, a nonprofit organization that is working with the city of Boston to create a new memorial and educational programs about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King and their time and work together here in Boston. Amari brings to this role a wealth of experience and enormous passion from the nonprofit management, community activism, education, and social justice sectors. He has served in executive roles at Parenting Journey, Jumpstart, Boston Rising, and Friend of the Children. Currently, he serves as a trustee of the UMass system, as well as on the board of the United South End Settlement, the Providers Council, and Governor Baker's Black Advisory Commission. Amari is a 3-time graduate of UMass Boston. He's currently pursuing his doctorate to the UMass Boston Higher Education Program. Amari is going to share a bit about King Boston, its purpose, its mission, and opportunities. And then we're going to have a conversation about equity, inclusion, creativity, hope, and community, and anything else that comes as we begin our discussion. So I am delighted to welcome Amari Parrish Jeffries. Thank you, Amari.
Good morning. Thank you, President Grant. It's always great to see you. It's always great to be in community with the colleges of the Fenway and Mass Art, institutions that are near and dear to my heart, and so important to the ecosystem of our city and our region and our country. I wanted to start off by reading a quote from Dr. King. Many might not know that in the later part of Dr. King's life, he came back to Boston and led the 1965 Freedom Rally. And so when at the conclusion of the rally at Boston Common, there were about 22,000 people there. And I want to just read an excerpt that just ground us today. I was educated here, and it is one of the cities which I call home. I come here not to condemn, but to encourage. It would be dishonest of me to say that Boston is Birmingham or that Massachusetts is Mississippi. But it would be irresponsible of me to deny the crippling poverty and injustice that exists in some sections of this community. The vision of the new Boston must extend into the heart of Roxbury. Boston must be a testing ground for the ideal of freedom. And I think, we're celebrating the King holiday after Dr. King's birthday. And what I love and appreciate about the fact that we're celebrating it after the holiday is that we understand the values, the mission, the work of Dr. King is not done. And we understand that this is a year-long process to continue to be the best city, the best universities, the best institutions, the best individuals that we can be to ensure that racial equity, justice, inclusion, sense of belonging is a spirit that is extended throughout the year. And so I'm so excited to be here today and be in community with everyone this morning.
So Amari, and it's great to see you and great to have you here. And, and I think of all, the work and what you just said about calling, Boston home and the rally on the Common. I mean, tell us, when you think about the work of King Boston and the importance of today, tell us a little bit about how that centers in that period of time and where we are as a city today. And how do we connect with you through the colleges of the Fenway through that work?
Yeah, there so many great leaders have come through Boston, and the Kings were part of the cadre of great leaders that are a part of our city. And I think people don't know that. I think people know that Dr. King went to Boston University, but people don't know that they met here. They went on their first date. Dr. and Mrs. King were introduced by a friend at 12th Baptist Church. Their first date was a blind date. Dr. King was a 22-year-old PhD student. He was a prodigy. He graduated from college at 19, went to divinity school, and found his way in Boston to pursue a PhD. Mrs. King was a classically trained singer, went to New England Conservatory, and so different walks of life. In the 50s, Dr. King came with a car. And so you can imagine nowadays a college student coming in a car, let alone someone who was Black in the 50s in Boston in a car. And so Boston is the fourth largest college town in the country now. The other college towns map the population sizes of the city. And so New York is obviously the largest city in our country, largest college town. LA is number 2, Chicago is number 3. Boston is number 4, despite being, some might say, the 9th or 11th, sometimes with the 15th largest city or geographic area. 375,000 students pursue their higher education in the Commonwealth every single year. Now it was smaller in the 50s, but the Kings were a part of this cadre of students who came to Boston to pursue their higher education. And you can imagine being Black folks in Boston in the 50s that it wasn't a friendly town. It wasn't a welcoming town for Black folks in the 50s. It wasn't an inclusive town. It wasn't very welcoming. And so we have this opportunity right now to reimagine a post-pandemic Boston as an inclusive, as a friendly, as a welcoming, as a safe town, right? And so there might be a future Dr. and Mrs. King in our ranks as students, as residents, as visitors in this audience listening on right now. And we have to ensure that this is a place that's welcoming. This is a place that is safe for everyone. And I could imagine if Boston was that place in the 50s and the Kings decided, like many college students do, to settle in Boston after they graduated, Boston could have been the epicenter of the national civil rights movement. And imagine what our city would have been like if that were to occur. And so this is the opportunity now, post-pandemic, to imagine that there are students that are in our ranks, that are going to our universities, that have these ideas that can lead the way in our country, in our world around inclusion, racial equity, climate justice. And we have to ensure that our city and our region is a welcoming, safe place. Former City Councilor Tito Jackson, who is the former City Councilor of Roxbury, says that Boston welcomes almost every new person to our city. And so if you're listening, if you haven't got the welcome card from the city of Boston, it's usually orange and it usually shows up on your windshield. And sometimes it costs about $45 to $65. And so the way that Boston welcomes new people is by ticketing them, and then they know that they are welcomed into the city. And so we have to really do a better job of ensuring that this is a place that our reputation of being the down south of up north is diminished, eliminated. And I think this is the moment in time. This is King Boston's work. This is the work of the Colleges of Fenway. This is the work of Mass Art. We're educating students for the future.
That's great. And, I've experienced a few of those welcome messages myself over the years, even though I am from Boston. So we continue that warm welcome. So, when you think about, the history and the legacy of Boston and Boston has a reputation nationally. It's not one that we're proud of in terms of being a city that has had enormous racial divides and issues over the years from our history of busing and beyond. What do you see that's changing? Is it changing? And what do you see that's hopeful? I know, I've seen some of the episodes you've been working on, the mini documentaries about some leaders in Boston, and those are very inspiring. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at your website, and we'll make that information available. But what is it that gives you hope? What is it that gives you pause?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think we're in a moment in time where we understand that cultural representations are intimately involved in the anti-racist discourse around the country. And so, just a few months ago in Richmond, they finally removed the large Robert E. Lee statue memorial in Monuments Row in Richmond. And these statues, these monuments, reify white supremacy. They work in the background. It is as if you drink eight glasses of water every day, get that 7 or 8 hours sleep, eat well, exercise, but you're still getting sick because you live next to a toxic waste dump. And so monuments and culture are like that. They reify in the background. They diminish our anti-racist hygiene. And so when we think about street names, there's over 7,000 streets named after Christopher Columbus, Columbus Ave, right? Mel King, who is an icon in the city, lives on Columbus Ave. And so imagine being an Indigenous person living on a Columbus Avenue. What is that like? Imagine being a person of color or a historically marginalized individual and going to Robert E. Lee Junior High School. There are 240 public high schools named after Confederate leaders. And so I think part of the discourse that we're having is understanding not only the direct ways through policy, through ERGs, through training, equity training, that we can all do in our companies, our churches, places of worship, but also the way that culture has an intimate impact on anti-racism. I think what gets me hopeful about our region is the emergence of women leaders, particularly women of color in elected leadership positions, in positions of leadership in higher education institutions. That emergence, if you've seen The Embrace, The Embrace is a photograph, is based on a photograph of Dr. and Mrs. King embracing after Dr. King found out he had won the Nobel Prize. And in The Embrace, Dr. King is hugging Mrs. King on top. Mrs. King is hugging Dr. King on the bottom. And so I don't know, you could practice this at home with your loved ones. If you're a bottom hugger or a top hugger, practice hugging on someone and see what your natural inclination. But Hank Willis Thomas, the artist of The Embrace, when he looked at that photo for inspiration, what he appreciated and what brought him inspiration to create The Embrace from that photo was that Mrs. King's arms were on the bottom. The photo, it represents pure joy and love in their faces, but in their body language, the weight of Dr. King's work is rested on the shoulders of Mrs. King. Mrs. King's arms are underneath, literally holding him up, holding his weight up. And it's symbolic, the power of Black women holding the movements, holding families, holding institutions together. And Mrs. King's impact as a hidden figure, like she was there, but we really don't talk about her. But as a hidden figure in Dr. King's legacy, and it's important to celebrate her, them as a couple and as a team. And so I think that gives me hope. Rachel Rollins as state's attorney, Mayor Wu, Congresswoman Presley, the mayor of Cambridge, who is of Muslim descent, our attorney general, the elections that are coming up, and some of the powerful women that are running for office. That gives me hope for our future, that these hidden figures, these leaders that have rightfully been denied or wrongfully been denied places of leadership, that's occurring. But Boston is a scary place. The protests in front of Mayor Wu's home, the protests in front of Rachel Rollins's home. This is white supremacy at its worst. We are in positive but fragile times, very fragile times, and I think it's up to folks who are on the Zoom in community to continue the momentum so that these fragile times turn into solid times, turn into institutional times, turn into public and permanent times.
Agreed, Amari, very powerful points in looking at the role of women in the movement and looking at the role of Coretta Scott King in particular, because hers is one of those powerful, increasingly we're knowing about her. And I think that the work that you're doing through King Boston, celebrating her as part of this partnership, because she is the one that led to really the legacy building for her husband, to carry on the movement, to carry on the story, to ensure that we didn't forget. So I think the wisdom and the beauty of honoring her as part of this is really powerful to tell. One of the things I think we're trying to do a better job of, that we must do a better job of, is telling the whole history, interrogating the pieces that are missing and filling in those pieces, because we have not done a good job. And that's one of, I think, the incumbent responsibilities on our education systems, is to tell the collective history, our whole history, our united history, and not just the select parts of it that we're more comfortable with, perhaps, or we're more familiar with. And so I think this is a wonderful way to educate as well as enrich the culture and create pathways forward for additional work in the next generation of activists and agitators and leaders. And so, I guess that makes me think about, we think about the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s carried into the 70s. And we think about, the civil rights movements of today. I mean, how would you think about and compare and contrast the movements of an earlier day to the movements that are happening now in some very powerful ways? What do you see as the same, and what do you see as different?
Yeah, I think the similarities are that young people are leading the way, and old fogies like myself are here to just I think really block and tackle and really steward, lay the playing field where our role permits. but really support young people in their leadership. And, I think when we think about Dr. King's legacy, but Dr. King was assassinated in his 30s. So his legacy was that of a younger adult. He was not this wise old figure, and so much of his work happened in his 20s and 30s, right? And so we think about the student leaders of the 60s that were John Lewis was a student leader who emerged to fame. Bob Moses, who recently passed away from Cambridge, was a young person who organized students. And so I think the similarities are the power of youth. And I think today's young people have less tolerance for things that were acceptable for folks of an older generation. They have less patience for it. They're more educated. They're smarter. They communicate and connect better through technology and through commonality. I think we've been responsible for raising and stewarding, I think, a really powerful generation of leaders that don't feel constrained by labels and titles and formalities that really don't define us, that really have subtly held us back. And I think that gives me so much hope. I mean, Mayor Wu is in her 30s, leading one of the most important cities in our country. The chief of economic development, Shagun Itawu, is in his early 30s. And before that came from BECMA and really created a powerhouse to talk about economic justice in Black businesses and Black communities throughout the Commonwealth. And so I think I'm optimistic about the future. And I think Boston really has an opportunity as a city and a region. The Commonwealth really has an opportunity to lead the nation. I think, we would probably argue our importance over Philadelphia, but Boston tells America's story. And so every year, at least pre-pandemic, the virtual family of 4 from Kansas City would come to Boston to walk the Freedom Trail to get their American story reified, to fill their heart with stories of patriotism, one if by land, two if by sea. Imagine if we retold the story on the Freedom Trail and talked about the indigenous people who were here, talked about the contributions of Black folks who were here, and talked about the contributions of Asians who were here and other cultures who were here during the colonial period. That virtual family of 4 would hear a different story of America. And so we have this opportunity to continue to redefine the story. And this is the power of art, right? This storytelling, this counter narrative work, this ability to help people think. Art and culture. The Freedom Trail is a cultural tour. It's about the arts and humanities. It's about telling people and reifying these stories. And that's the role that racism has played, is reified stories that have subtly oppressed us. And I think young people have realized these stories don't fit me. These stories are not my stories. They're new stories to tell. And I think that's what gives me hope.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, those of us who work within the colleges of the Fenway, work on these campuses, we're working, I say frequently, I get to work in the business of hope, because we see that energy, we see that enthusiasm, we see the accountability, because, when I look at the generation that coming through our campuses, these are folks who have come of age, post 9/11, Great Recession, multiple pandemics, racial strife, an erosion of democracy, an assault on the Capitol, their sustainability, climate change, they are pushing for change, and we need to be able to work alongside them, meet them where they are, and accompany them on that journey. And I think when I think about Dr. King, the inspiration he drew, he was a young, I just, at one point I was a young college president, and, we all were, and we reflect on that. But when you think about it, Dr. King began his journey at an extraordinarily young age because of who he was and what shaped him. And I think that's true with our students today. And so that opportunity to work with them, and I couldn't agree with you more about the space that arts and culture play, because it is the telling of our history and the sharing of experience. The time that we're in going through the pandemic, I'm looking at the art our students are making on campus and in their work, and it's telling a story of this period of time that we need to hang on to and learn from and understand and figure out how we do better together. So I think the I love that King Boston is combining that. It's the knowledge base, it's understanding the history, but it's also looking at how culture advances this knowledge and helps us translate it and interpret it for the current times. We were privileged on campus to have Hannah Nicole Jones join us back in the late fall, and reading the 1619 project. That's the history we need to be talking about, the full history, our shared history.
Yes.
It informs all of us, and our country was built upon that history. So we have such important work to do together, and it's encouraging. I'm encouraged by hearing what you're talking about and the work of King Boston. When I think about that other, one of King's famous quote around chaos or community, what's the way forward? And that was, I think, the title of the last book he wrote before he was killed. And so when I look at what's happening now in the context of the deep divides we're experiencing in this country on so many fronts, how do you see the possibilities of King Boston, not all by yourself, but helping, to bridge those divides, to pull us together? Because, it really is, we're at an inflection point around that chaos or community. And I'd love to hear just some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think we feel that part of our most important work is cultural representations. We're building a memorial that is 20 feet high, 40 feet wide. It will honor Dr. and Mrs. King with the embrace in the center, but also 65 other Boston civil rights leaders. And so this idea of cultural representations is an important part of the work. Again, they work in the background. So this cultural divide that's occurring isn't by accident. I think people don't know the dog whistle is playing in the background. They have a secret app that's working on their emotional handheld phone that's draining their batteries or forcing them to move in one way or another. In our country, the top 50 memorials in our country, if I were to do a show of hands, and maybe people could write it in the chat, if they had to guess who is the top memorialized person in their country, if they have access to do it in the chat, if they could just write down who they think is the top memorialized, maybe 1 and 2. And maybe we'll take 3 seconds for folks to take a second to chat. Maybe I should have had a survey. It would have popped up. It would have been interesting. We could see. But I'm seeing some names pop up: George Washington, JFK, Thomas Jefferson, Abe Lincoln. Yep. So some good ones. Abraham Lincoln. Seeing a lot of Lincoln. Someone said white guys. Lincoln, Jefferson. The top 50 number one most memorialized person is Abraham Lincoln. Number 2 is George Washington. I think most of us would have assumed that. Number 3 is Christopher Columbus. And so we're having different conversations, right? We grew up, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. He discovered America, right? These myths, right? The way that narrative shapes our collective thinking, right? Builds culture and points us in a direction. Number 4 is MLK, but number 6 is Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee is the 6th most memorialized person in the country. This is public art. And so the role, the silent role, the powerful role of art to shape behavior, to create the divide, is an important role, right? And so number 13 is Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. Now this is top 50 memorials in the country. Jefferson Davis is number 13. Robert E. Lee is number 6. There are more monuments of Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee than Harriet Tubman or even FDR or JFK combined. Number 43 is Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. So there's more monuments and memorials of the founder of the Ku Klux Klan than any other great American. And so when you talk about how this divide occurs and the role of art, particularly public art, shaping a narrative, I think mass art is on the front lines of creating the type of art activists that are necessary to create counter monuments, to create the counter stories, and the other colleges of Fenways, to create thinkers and scholars, critical thinkers, to interrogate what is and ask what could be, right? If all of a sudden every person in the United States were to disappear and we were going to do an anthropological and archaeological study like we do for, in the pyramids of the ancient Egyptians, and space aliens said, what were these Americans about? and they just use our monuments and memorials. The American Monument and Memorial story would be about the oppression of indigenous, of Black folks. It would be about war conquests, military victories, and the raising up of white supremacy. There were 430 public art installations of the Confederacy between the years of 1910 to 1930. Now, the Civil War had passed, 430 between 1910 and 1930. And so the Daughters of the American Confederacy understood the power of art for propaganda, for culture building, for mindset's sake. 240 public schools named after a Confederate leader, 7,000 streets, avenues, ways named after Christopher Columbus. And so the role of the public, the role of art to help or to shape thinking is critical. And I think that is central to our work, is to raise up that role and to I think align with mass art, create the next generation of art activists, because artists really shape the heart and soul of our country.
Agreed. And it tells a story of a time, and it also helps to tell the new story. It can change the discussion in powerful ways that complements the written word as well. I look around the neighborhoods that we get to call home here in the Fenway and Mission Hill area, and some of the incredibly beautiful mural art that is taking place at Madison Park High School and on bodegas. And, you look down streets and it's reclaiming parts of our neighborhood and bringing life and energy and that spirit and infusion of community. The Sunflower Project done by the great Equa Holmes, it just is those pockets of inspiration that leave us enriched, that allow us to understand that in our neighborhoods and our communities are individuals who live and lead whole, beautiful lives and are our neighbors and our friends. And we need to break down those barriers, because it's that construction of community that gives us the hopeful way forward, I believe.
That's right.
And, in simple ways of coming together, whether it's over a flower garden or discussing what is that cardinal on Mel King's shoulder on the wall of Madison Park High School all about. Those engage us in ways with strangers because we're suddenly curious about it. And those also break down the barriers and help us to know one another better than we might otherwise. Very rich and important work happening across the community, which is encouraging and exciting to see. So Amari, we've talked about the work, we've talked about, the role of, can you tell us a little bit? I mean, you and I share we're both proud graduates of UMass Boston. And so tell a little bit about your pathway, because I think about the students who are in our institutions and, and just what was your journey like a little bit? What are some of the lessons you learned along the way that might be helpful to the generation of leaders coming through our campuses?
Yeah, and so I'm in the higher education administration program at UMass Boston with several friends on the Zoom call today, and I think in this moment in time, I think my pathway to this doctorate degree that I'm on has been shaped in the Black intellectual tradition, right? So my undergraduate degree was in Black studies and history. And so the Black intellectual tradition is really balancing scholarship with activism. And so always maintaining this level of intellectual curiosity and developing and obtaining more tools to interrogate what is, to imagine what could be. And so, my journey has always been in service. Right immediately after high school, I joined the Army. And so military service to my country was how my journey in service started. And I had an opportunity through that service to use the GI Bill and go to a public university, UMass Boston, where it seems like I haven't stopped. And, I've kept going. They keep accepting me. I'm going to keep going. I'm done now. I'm not done with the degree, but I think I'm done taking class and going to school. I gotta sunset that soon. But this idea of us being lifelong learners in any way we can, and it doesn't have to be in formal schooling. After students, pursue higher education, if that's the pathway that they choose, there's plenty of ways in which folks can continue to be lifelong learners in their art, in their craft, in their technical skills, in the humanities with their bodies, and continue to be a learner and apply that for their overall well-being. I think we're in the anti-racist conversation. We're also talking about well-being as an important aspect of the struggle. We always can, first of all, talk about technical problems. We're talking about policy, but we don't talk about the well-being of women and the well-being of historically marginalized people. It's oftentimes in the back, and people might say, "Oh, Imari, what's that mean?" In Boston, there's only four Black people that have an entertainment license. What's an entertainment license? That's the ability to sell alcohol in your restaurant. 4. And so if you talk about the system intentionally not creating safe spaces for entertainment, not creating safe spaces where people of color can go and see people like themselves, full entertainment license, 4. And so if the systematic oppression of people of color doesn't include well-being, and this is just one simple example, well-being extends to housing, extends to safety. 1/3 of individuals who are killed by police are killed in pre-textual stops by police officers, right? And so this idea of really imagining, what's a pre-textual stop and why does that continue to happen? So safety and well-being is an important part of the discourse right now. Art is one space where well-being can occur, but this idea of well-being as a principle of liberation for Black folks is a part of the discourse today. And I think this is what I'm talking about, where young people have said, hey, we can't only talk about policy, we can't only talk about these institutionalized ways in which racism occurs. We have to talk about all the ways in which it impacts our lives. And I think that's what also gives me optimism. But this idea of well-being and creating safe spaces for folks, and I know that you're doing at Mass Art with many of the clubs and societies and living spaces for historically marginalized students, so that they feel connected with folks of similar culture. Many higher education institutions have been doing this, for a lot longer than other places. But this is an important part of the work today.
Exactly. I mean, we have our Compass program, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And that's a program specifically designed for mentoring for first generation students, so that students and BIPOC students, so that they are mentoring with alums, with faculty. It's really important, because I know if I never saw a woman college president, I might not know that was possible for me. And so having people who can help us, can hold out that hand. And I think it's incumbent, Amari, what you were just talking about, the 4 businesses in Boston that have the licenses to run their business appropriately and open it up to the community. It's incumbent upon allies in this. It's incumbent upon leaders from across the community, from across the sectors, to look at all those practices, because we come up in those systems. And when as a white woman, I can be blind to those systems because I navigate it differently. And so it's incumbent upon all of us, no matter what role we're in, no matter what hat we're wearing, no matter what institution we show up in, to really take a look at, what are the things that we need to be changing and paying attention to on an ongoing basis. I think as we've looked at the last few years, when we think about the many high-profile deaths that have captured our collective attention in horrific and sad ways that go on, this has to be not a moment in time, but a movement that carries us and then brings us back, I think, to the central tenet of, King's message in so many ways, that we can't be afraid to talk about, in the midst of all the hard conversations that we have to have, the honest conversations, talking about how we unite, how we express love, how we support one another, because it's about coming back together, healing, and going forward. And I think as we come together today with the Colleges of the Fenway, and we continue these reflections, for the next 24 years, that's the important work to do. And working with our students, meeting them where they are, yes, and being on that journey with them to where we go next together. So as we are wrapping up today's conversation, which, I just want to say it is always such a joy. I can't wait till we're sitting in the same space, sipping a cup of coffee, solving all the problems of the world and applauding David Ortiz's elevation to the Hall of Fame, because that, I have to say, that's an awesome thing.
Yes.
But, leave us with, we're a call to action. When I think about students on our campus, they are called to action. We are all here. So when we think about what each one of us could do in a mission of service, and going back to King's words of everyone can be great because everyone can serve, what would you call upon the institutions that are your partners across the College of the Fenway and the legions of students and the incredibly talented faculty, staff, and alumni, and our board members who are part of this community?
Yeah, I think in a later part of King's life, the central issue was civil rights, but in the later part of his life, the issues increased. And so Dr. King and Mrs. King were talking about poverty. They were talking about racial equity in a broad way. They were talking about anti-war. And I think if they were alive today, they would also be talking about climate justice. We're in a moment in time where, I'll say our deity or Mother Nature is asking us all, do we think that every person in our species deserve to be here? Right. If you remember Maslow's hierarchy of need, the bottom rung was physiological needs: food, shelter, clothing, education. The next rung up is safety, and then the next one, sense of belonging, and then esteem, self-actualization at the top, right? And so the physiological needs, I think we are litigating that in the court of public opinion, and it looks like reparations. And so we're talking about, do people's past things that were wrong with them, do they deserve to have them right? We're litigating that through Affordable Care Act conversations. Do all of us deserve the right to health care that keeps us alive and safe? Do all of us deserve homes? Do all of us deserve access to education? Do all of us deserve mental health support? And so Mother Nature, or our deity, is asking us, human beings, here's a pandemic. Answer the question, do all of you belong to be here? Do all of you deserve to be here? I don't think we're united as a species on that question. Forest fires, climate change, oceans rising, Australia is burning. Mother Nature, your deity, our deity, the spirits are saying, human beings, will you ensure that everyone makes it out of here? I don't know if we've answered yes directly. Again, we're litigating these conversations through policy. In every major city, there's a mass and caste, right? There are people who are unhomed. There are people who are underinsured. There are people who are struggling with substance use disorder. There are people who are struggling with mental health disorder. Mother Nature is saying, hey, here's the most vulnerable. I'm putting the most vulnerable in the city. Human beings, will you ensure that they have what they need, right? Dr. King would ask us to ensure that we live in a world where all of us have what we need to be the best person, that we're not here just to move ourselves out of 2-day delivery to 1-day delivery. We're not here to graduate from college so we can get a better job, so we can buy that chair and sit in front of our computers 2 hours longer because we have a good chair. I think we're here, and Dr. King, if he were here today, would argue that we're here to ensure that this garment of destiny, this interrelated fabric, where we're all connected, is ensured, and that our obligation and responsibilities as members of the species is to take care of each other. And so I think my call to action would be for us to look at Dr. King's holiday as a second opportunity for New Year's resolution, to not commit to doing blind service so that you can feel good about helping others, but that you take the time to understand the issues and that you interrogate and do those and work on those issues within your own sphere of influence, to ensure that all of us are here when this pandemic, when this, we can get out of this climate change, when all of this is said and done, that we've made a commitment to ensure that every member of our species can thrive and to reach their full potential.
Wow, that is beautifully said. A lot to think about, Amari. And I know I can, speak for my fellow president friends and the colleges at the Fenway, that we look forward to partnering in this work together. We have to be in this together. I think about, the community that I get to be in every day here at MassArt, and I feel so privileged to be part of a place and part of a community where people want to make a best difference. And we're not without power. It's how we use it. We're not without agency. It's how we express it. And those of us who have the opportunity to lead organizations have a responsibility to also clear the path. So thank you for bringing these things to our attention, for helping to clear those paths, for inspiring us today. And we are so looking forward to this incredible coming together of the city of Boston when we unveil this beautiful work of art that celebrates a life and a legacy, and more importantly, points us that there is more work to be done. We will do that work together, and that we can be mindful to hold each other in that embrace when we need that support, that shoring up for the long haul. So I thank you, my friend. Be well, stay well. We're looking forward to much good work ahead, and congratulations on the success you've already had, and all who have worked with you to get to this point. We look forward to what's to come. So I'm thanking you, Amari, on behalf of the Colleges of the Fenway. I'm going to turn it back over to our Executive Director, Claire Ramsbottom, to bring us through. But please, everyone, how about from wherever you're sitting, and a round of applause for our good friend and our inspirational colleague, Amari's Parrish Jeffries. And we look forward to the journey ahead together. So thank you, Amari, very much.
And thank you, President Grant. It's always great to see you, and really thank you for being a leader in not only higher education, but so many folks can trace their lineage to your leadership and your support and your friendship and your wisdom. And so I really appreciate seeing you and being able to be with you here today, and the warm invite from everyone. So thank you all.
It's fun, and it's a privilege. And having done this so many years now, I look at where my alumni are, and there's even a few in the Boston City Council that I'm really proud of. So yeah. Blessings on you, my friend, and to all of you who are here today. Let's carry on the good works, the incredibly important works of Dr. King and of Coretta Scott King, and our own work of being activists for change and for community strengthening. So Claire, over to you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Amari and Mary. So much to consider from that conversation and the important work that King Boston is doing. Such an inspirational conversation, and the questions that Amari posed to us. How we respond to those questions is our legacy. Why are we here, and what are we called to do? I am looking forward to finding new ways to work in partnership with King Boston. I would now like to direct your attention to a pre-recorded dramatic reading of the testimony of civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. This reading is by Nadell Henville, a member of the COF Theater Ensemble and a senior theater arts student at Emmanuel College. For those of you who are not familiar with Fannie Lou's testimony, it can be unsettling and triggering.
Fannie Lou Townsend Hamer rose from humble beginnings in the Mississippi Delta to become one of the most passionate and powerful voices of the civil and voting rights movements, and a leader in the efforts for greater economic opportunities for African Americans. I am honored to share her words with you today. Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Ruleville, Mississippi, Sunflower County. It was the 31st of August in 1962. The 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Ruleville, we was met by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day for driving a bus the wrong color. After we had paid the fine among us, we continued on to Ruleville, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and a sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children, who told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down and tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, "Fannie Lou, do you know? Did Pop tell you what I said?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, I mean that." Said, "If you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave." Said that if you don't go down and withdraw, said you might still have to because we're not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him and said, "I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself." I had to leave that same night. And June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop. I was returning back to Mississippi, and 10 of us were traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom. The 4 people who had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus, but when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off of the bus to see what had happened. And when the lady said it was a state highway patrolman and the chief of police that ordered us out, they began to get the 5 people in a highway patrolman's car. And somebody screamed from the car that the 5 workers was in and said, "Get that one there." And when I went to get into the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me. I was carried off to the county jail. I was placed in a cell with a young woman called Miss Ivesta Simpson, and after I was placed in the cell, I began to hear sounds of licks and screams. I could hear the sounds of licks and horrible screams, and I could hear somebody say, "Can you say yes, sir? Can you say yes, sir?" And they would say other horrible names, and she would say, "Yes, I can say yes, sir, so I'll say it." She said, "I don't know you well enough." They beat her. I don't know how long, and after a while she began to pray and ask God to have mercy on those people. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a highway patrolman, and he asked me where I was from, and I told him Ruleville. He said, "We're going to check this," and they left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, "You're from Ruleville, all right," and he said a curse word, and he said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead." I was carried out of that cell and into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro prisoner ordered me, by orders from the state highway patrolman, for me to lay down on a bunk bed on my face. And I laid on my face. The first Negro began to beat me. And I was beat by the first Negro until he was exhausted. And after the first Negro had beat until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the blackjack. The second Negro had began to beat, and I began to work my feet. And the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro who had beat me to sit on my feet to keep me from working my feet, and I began to scream, and one white man got up and began to beat me in my head and told me to hush. And one white man, my dress had worked up high, and he walked over and pulled my dress, and I pulled my dress down, and he pulled my dress back up. All of this on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America the land of the free and home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hooks because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings? In America,
you, Nadell, for that moving performance. Just for a moment, we need to consider that Fannie Lou Hamer spoke to those assembled at the Democratic National Convention 4 years before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. If you are not familiar with her story, I encourage you to do a little research. She was a leader in the civic and voting rights movements, established Freedom Farm cooperatives, recognizing the ties between economic and political empowerment, and was one of the founders of the National Women's Political Caucus. She was 44 when she learned she had the right to vote and started the battle to exercise that right. As we well know, that battle is still being waged. And as Fannie Lou Hamer and Dr. King's stories remind us, each of us has the responsibility to work toward the just and equal society we envision. Good morning. I'm Claire Ramsbottom, Executive Director of the Colleges of the Fenway. I now have the privilege of recognizing the recipient of this year's Colleges of the Fenway Martin Luther King Jr. Inclusive Service Award. This award recognizes a faculty or staff member who goes above and beyond day-to-day professional responsibilities to embody the spirit and legacy of Dr. King. Having read all of the nominations this year, we should be proud of the collective work that is being undertaken by individuals and programs across our campuses to bring us to a better understanding and practice of inclusive excellence. Though we were only able to select one recipient, I want to acknowledge those who were nominated and the many other people who, while they may not have been nominated, are doing the work. I'm sure many of you are here today. The nominees this year were Erica Montfort from Simmons University, Artward Bound in Academic Compass programs at MassArt, the Center for Art and Community Partnerships at MassArt, Lisa Holloway at MassArt, and Beth Valero at MassArt. Lisa Riley at MCPHS for the PA program and the Boston DEI Committee, and William Wilson from MCPHS. It is now my pleasure to recognize Dr. Gary Bailey, Assistant Dean for Community Engagement and Social Justice at the College of Social Sciences Policy and Practice at Simmons University with this year's Colleges of the Fenway MLK Inclusive Service Award. Gary is also a professor of practice in Simmons' Schools of Social Work and Nursing and Health Sciences. He has over 25 years of experience in social justice advocacy, community partnerships, and teaching. He has devoted his career to sharing his deep knowledge, expertise, and leadership in the fields of social work, public health, youth education, and affordable housing. At Simmons, he coordinates the Dynamics of Racism and Oppression sequence. He chairs the School of Social Work Awards Committee, is chair of the Simmons University Black Administrators Faculty and Staff Council, is a member of the Simmons Faculty Senate, is vice chair of the Simmons President's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council, and co-chaired the Simmons Initiative on Human Rights and Social Justice. He also serves on the Colleges of the Fenway Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. As one of his nominators said, he is often called in to be the voice of conscience, providing clarity, unquestionable executive presence, and a global listener with the ability to move us from thought to an effective response. Gary is a presence both locally and internationally, serving as the president of the NASW Assurance Services, as a mentor in the Diversity Scholars Leadership Program at Boston University School of Public Health, Maternal and Child Health Center for Excellence, as president of the board for Fenway High School, as a member of the board of the South End Library. He is also vice chair of the board for MIFA and a member of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Health Equity Council. His commitment to advancing the availability of affordable housing includes leadership roles for our communities and on the board of the United South End Settlement. In 2010, Professor Bailey was elected president of the International Federation of Social Workers based in Bern, Switzerland, the first person of color to hold this post. He holds advisory and board roles with the North American and Caribbean Association of Schools of Social Work's Council on Social Work Education. Gary is a longstanding member of Boston's Union United Methodist Church, where he is chair of the church council and a member of its leadership team. His nominators noted that Gary's commitment to the community is unsurpassed, having served as teacher, mentor, sponsor among his most impactful roles. Having known Gary since my early days at COF, he walks the talk, bringing voice to those not in the room in every conversation. He is always teaching and engaging, and I leave every conversation with Gary with a new introspection. As another nominee noted, Gary Bailey embodies the meaning of doing and giving to others. Congratulations, Gary, for this well-deserved recognition. And I hope when you all see Gary, and I know he's on this today, you can congratulate him in person or in the chat. It's been an honor to join you for the 24th Annual Colleges of the Fenway Martin Luther King Jr. celebration at MassArt. We hope you have found the morning to be meaningful and an opportunity to better consider the legacy of Dr. King's work and the call to action and opportunities that Amari Parrish Jeffries and King Boston put before us. We all have a role to play in achieving the vision of making Boston a model of racial equity and justice. I know I will bring a new view to all seeing all the monuments as I visit new places and as I walk around this area. We all need to consider the stories we carry as we have learned history, and as educators, the responsibility we have to unpack and relearn those stories. Yesterday, I read an article in the Nonprofit Quarterly examining whiteness. There's so much to digest in this article, and I'd like to invite anyone who's interested to read it and join me for a discussion in what it says. I could use that to have other people to work with it on, to work through it with me. And I'll put a link to the article in the chat. I do want to say we recognize that some of what you have heard today may evoke some strong emotional responses. And I want to remind you that all of our institutions have employee assistance programs, Title IX, and counseling support, and that there are close to 200 of us here today who are ready to support each other. Next year, we'll invite you to join us for the 25th Annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, which will be hosted by Wentworth Institute of Technology. And as we close out today's program, you'll be listening once again to the COF Jazz Band under the direction of Jason Whiting. This piece, entitled Take the A Train, is composed by Billy Strayhorn with lyrics by Joya Sherrill. Enjoy the rest of your morning. Take time to connect with each other and process what you've heard. And I hope that we get to see you in person next year. Thank you.
Must take the A train to go to Sugar way up in Harlem. If you miss the A train, you'll find you miss the quickest way to Harlem. Hurry on Sugar Hill in Harlem. Hurricane, boy, it's coming. Listen to those bells are drumming. On board, get on the A train. Soon you will be on Sugar Hill in Harlem. Oh, soon you will be on Sugar Hill in Harlem. Oh, soon you will be on Sugar Hill in Harlem.